It's 16 days of activism against violence against women and children. Tonight's guest says rightfully that there should be 365 days of activism, 366 days if you count next year, which is a leap year. It takes the same amount of soil to dig a grave than it does to plant a garden. When I could have been buried, I chose to be planted. We all have this power to choose what to do with what we have been given. So to choose how everything affects us. That's Lynn Hill, tonight's guest. How are you doing, Lynn?
I am well and always blessed when I'm able to use a platform such as this to make a difference. So thank you.
That's quite an inspirational quote, but it doesn't come from somebody from America or a pop star or a dead 18th century poet. It comes from you. So how did you come about this particular insight?
Wow. So the quote is about 2 years old. The insight was percolating over the past, 40 years now. And I guess I could have been buried the first time when I was sexually brutalized at the age of 15 by someone who belonged to my church. A rape so brutal that the police thought a train had ridden over my face. I was told I'd never be able to bear children, a near-death experience as a result of the brutalization and the bashing, lost consciousness, crossed over onto the other side, and then was retracted to come and live my purpose in moments such as this.
But before we get to that, and of course, you know, we're especially grateful that you would come here and share that story, but it's only one facet of yourself. As we said, that was burying, the act of sort of, in a way, burying, being buried, the death, and also the act of growing a garden, which is creation. So you've taken something that is negative and you've on the journey of turning it into something positive in other people's lives. But before we get into the substance of Lynn Hill as a person, let's talk about Lynn Hill as credentials. Your CV is so long, we could spend all podcasts going through all of those aspects. But in a nutshell, who are you professionally?
Professionally, I'm now, I think, 13 or 14 times global award-winning speaker, poet, author, organizational development practitioner, qualified counselor, and about to go and study again as well and enter my PhD candidateship. But I am not my titles.
Mm-hmm. Nobody is their credentials.
I am not my titles, and I don't believe that titles define us. In fact, I believe nothing other than ourselves define us.
So then you're also, coming back to the quote, you can't come up with something like that without being a writer. You're also an author. You left that out of the introduction. Tell me about the books that you have written and are writing and the other works that you create.
So yes, I am an author. My first book won the 2020 African Authors Global Award under the genre inspirational. It's called Butterfly, My Soul Got Wings, What Life Has Taught Me. Again, my story, the whole story of which GBV is but an aspect or chapter, that just becomes the backdrop against which I drew the lessons. And if I didn't share the lessons, I would nullify the experience. So Butterfly, My Soul Got Wings, book 1 has been out for a while. I'm about to launch segments of my soul, more than just poetry, on International Women's Day, 8th March 2024. And then Butterfly book 2 is waiting in the wings. We're just waiting for book 1 to run its global course.
Now, your story is quite harrowing, and I have to ask, why do you want to? How do you insulate yourself from the trauma that you experienced when you tell and retell the story? Because it's quite a harrowing tale.
So I didn't always tell my story, Roscoe. It took me, about 17, 20 years, I was a high school guidance counselor and no one knew my story because I was still going through my own healing and also fresh injuries, emotional injuries and bruising inside my marriage then. So I didn't always tell the story. I think I started to tell the story when I felt I could tell the story and, as you say, insulate myself while doing so. And yet, the more I share, the more I heal, because I'm adding freedom not only to others' lives. Each time I'm now sharing, I'm also consolidating just how much I have overcome. I'm looking at myself through different eyes. The past 2 years particularly have been eyes of honor and saying, wow, what a brave little girl you were at 15 and what a woman you've become. And so, yeah.
Now that we are in the month of 16 days of activism against violence against women and children, when I was doing some research on you, you have an interesting redefinition, or rather a clarification of GBV. What does GBV stand for in the mind of most people, and how do you, I wouldn't say redefine it, but I would say refine it?
Yes. So GBV, remember, it came about from a government context, and it was the acronym for gender-based violence. And yes, it was scripted against an act of sorts, but if you didn't have insight into the act, and you spoke of GBV simply in terms with anybody on the street, any citizen, and the person knew that it stood for gender-based violence. It is very narrowing, because that for me, and I got to counsel one or two people and one or two couples to find out that the understanding was that if I am not violent, I'm not violating. And so my V for GBV is gender-based violation. The other thing about that act is if you didn't have insight into the act, you would not know that it's now been amended. So now it even includes things like coercion and personal infringement on, or infringement on personal belongings. So it's been amended and it's very, very broad. My only thing is, does SAPS know how broad it is? So when a woman now goes and she reports and she says, the law said that I can report because I'm being spiritually abused, which is another addition, or I'm being forcibly coerced against my will to do something, is that policeman going to understand that a rightful, lawful charge can actually be laid? So gender-based violation is, for me, the violation is broad because it taps into the fact that not all violation is violent. It also taps into just every area of violation, whether it is we experience violation on the internet, cyber violation, we experience violation within the corporate context, corporate bullying, we experience violation just in so many ways. Same gender violation, female to female violation. So it's important for us to also script our children, who is the future of this country, and script our change agents to know and to explain and to apply what non-violation is in their lives.
Because if a woman or any person is going to a warrant officer at a police station, they will immediately take out that chart and show me where the bleeding is, show me where the violence was inflicted, without understanding that a violation or a series of violations over time can be attritional to the person who is the victim of that violation. So I can understand and appreciate how you've come to refine GBV into gender-based violations. I mean, we'll talk later on a little bit more about how, for example, how things like patriarchy and how a woman laying a case at the police station, she's subject to not only patriarchal norms, but also badly trained police officers or unsympathetic ears or wherever she goes. But you've spoken about why you want to tell your story, and I think it's important for people to understand the grave, so to speak, the grave that was tilled for you against your agency. Are you comfortable with sharing that story?
Absolutely. And the whole idea, Roscoe, of sharing the story has never ever been to sensationalize my trauma. It has been, Marianne Williamson has this particular quotation, and it's one of my favorite, but the last two lines is, as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And as we are liberated from our own fears, our presence automatically liberates others. So as I share and utilize my voice, the message is really to tell all other women and men, you have a voice too. And if I can be sharing as a part of my mandate on this earth, then you can as well.
So who was 15-year-old Lynn Hill? What did she want to do? Where did she live? What was her family like? What did she eat for breakfast?
She was very vivacious, very spontaneous, ball of fire. 40 some odd years later, and I think there's still figments of the fire. She was a beauty queen. She loved acting. She loved schoolwork, so very well balanced. I was a ballet dancer, so I had quite a bit going for me. And I was an exceptionally self-confident young girl. Decent, very decent, pure, morally pure, very much on the straight and the narrow, which is why it was very difficult to make sense of why it would happen to me and why it did not happen to someone that was not me. And eventually you stop asking, to now realize after the second rape at 51 that the only way evil can have its identity is to feed off purity. If it doesn't feed off purity.
Were you active in the church?
Yes, I was a Sunday school teacher, attended youth every Friday evening. So I was one of those, man. I was one of those. Loved life, loved school, loved my dogs, had a good home life, loved my grandparents to bits, as well as my parents, in no order of preference.
And then one day it was just taken from you.
Yes. And I guess you never ever know what you are and who you are unless it's taken away. In this case, it was stolen. And one of the lines in my book is, my wings had been torn before I could even learn to fly. Because here was this child still developing into who she was going to become as this woman, and about to take off, having so much going and creating so many opportunities for herself, and then this happened. And I remember months after that saying to myself, if I didn't die when I was supposed to, I had to be spared from death for a reason far greater than my dying. In other words, I had to find the purpose of why I survived this.
Yes.
And tonight is a part of that purpose, an integral part of it. So I used my pain for humanity's gain, which translates into existentialism, which I never knew existed as a 15-year-old. All I knew was that I could not have survived this for nothing. And so for me, it became significantly important to find out what that something was and to begin to venture into what that something could be, which I did from about the age of 16. And a part of the something was to become a qualified counselor, to study psychology, to help others, to be able to sit opposite a trauma victim and not just say, I get you because the textbook says you've got to say that, but to be able to say, I've been there too. And I think those are the greatest moments of impact when you are sitting opposite someone who has been sexually traumatized and you're able to identify, and that is breakthrough just there.
Yeah. You've said that when you reported this to the police, that the officer gave quite a telling remark. Can you relate to us what he said?
Well, by the time I got to the police station, like I said, every hole in my body was bleeding. I was disfigured. And he looked at his colleague and he said, sure, this is a real rape. It was only on Lenina Klutish-Rasool's show a few years ago when I mentioned it that we kind of delved deeper into that. In my shocked state, it didn't quite hit the spot that it hits now. I thought, wow, I'm being acknowledged in that moment as I did go through this. But from a patriarchal perspective, and where we sit within not only our country and rape, but within our communities and the concept of rape, is that so much demystification still needs to happen around rape. And tonight I want to say two things: that first of all, rape is not having sex. It is not sexual intercourse. And secondly, rape by virtue of its violation aspect of the definition means that it was non-consensual.
Yes.
And those two, if we can just get those two things, I think we could go a far way.
What does that tell you, that remark, or what that officer said about the perception of a threshold for violence having to occur for it to be taken seriously?
Absolutely. Well, it's saying that, for me, what it says is that there are certain categories of violation, and that this was considered more serious because it was more visible.
Yes.
Which is so unjust and so unfair, because most people carry the injuries internally, well, metaphorically
Yes.
and literally.
Yes.
And I'm hoping that that officer has somehow gotten a greater understanding.
Do you feel that initiatives like 16 Days of Action Against Violence and such like raises an awareness, or do you think it's just some kind of superficial performative nod that we should be changing as a society?
If it has been effective, we would have been able to see the efficacy in statistics.
And we haven't.
We have not. What we have seen year after year, month after month, is an increase in the number of rapes and the number of femicides. So heck no, it's not working. When Mr. Ramaphosa gave one of his speeches in the heart of COVID, he called GBV the second pandemic. if we were to treat GBV the way we treated COVID, in a systemic way, with both the paralleling the preventative and the curative and the applied awareness, we'd get results. We've just not committed sufficiently as a government and as a country as well, as community agencies. I say to any person who has the ability to walk and speak and think for themselves, you are a GBV agency in motion. You don't have to be trained to show compassion. You don't have to be trained to show non-judgmentality. You don't have to be trained to just be a good human being standing in for another human being. You just have to be human.
Yes. The resources and support that was available to you when you were 15, what did you have to lean on? Friends and family, and what other, I would say, stumbling blocks were in your way from healing from trauma?
So I was very blessed, first of all, to have an amazingly supportive family. Because remember, this was 1983. So this was at a time, Roscoe, when so much was still swept. I mean, things are still being swept under the mat, but so much worse then. And again, for me to have spoken out as that 15-year-old. So the resources, rape crisis was around then, and they were phenomenal. But again, I was too traumatized to be able to even benefit from it. I knew I was not alone, but I also didn't, there was nothing to speak about because my soul and my heart and my body was literally obliterated. I did not know what to say. I was still trying to make out whether this did happen and whether it was me in my own narrative. So there was that component, and what hampered my healing definitely and exacerbated the trauma was the fact that when I came out of 72 hours of sedation, heavy sedation, he came out on a 500 Rand bail. So I awoke to the fact, literally waking up out of sedation, to the fact that he did have a bail hearing and he was out in the community, the same community in which I lived, on 500 Rand. And the court case was going to be July, and then it went from regional to Supreme Court because of the attempted attempted murder charge on top of the rape charge. And so for 10 months, I lived in absolute trepidation, trying my best to be courageous, but so diminished just at the thought of what if he comes back for you? What if he's not stupid enough to do that, but send someone else to kill you so that you won't give evidence? And on top of that, there was the societal persecution, the self-righteous persecution that came from the very church that I was serving, where you had the rapist family in the church, and you also had Lynn's family in the church, to a point that I guess I never went back for many, many years. In fact, I never went back to that church.
How did that, what happened subsequently to this person?
He was sentenced, and I was told in the July that he had to be heard in the Supreme Court so that his sentencing could way exceed 10 years, because the maximum sentencing in the regional court at that time was 10 years. And that created within me a false expectation. I felt excited at the thought that some form of justice was going to be served, that some payment of some sort was going to be made for just the level of brutality and torture that I had to endure for about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. And when that sentencing happened, and I heard that he only got 10 years, that was like my world falling apart.
I mean, there's one thing, justice is one thing, and healing is quite the other, but justice plays a part in the healing process.
Oh, my world fell apart. Was this what the 10 months of fear and the courage, and was this what it actually amounted to? And he was convicted, and luckily I never ever found out that he never ever served the 10 years. That the church apparently gave him a character reference to get parole far sooner.
I mean, this is sort of the pressure that society puts on women there, and victims in particular. So in effect, you had a double and a triple trauma to reconcile with or to recover from.
Which is what anyone who goes through, particularly sexual trauma, goes through. The first is the actual violation and victimization linked to that violation. The other is the secondary victimization that happens. I was lucky at this particular police station, other than that comment, there was just an amazing support system that went on and sustained for that 10 months. But you will have that victimization, you'll have the secondary victimization, and then you needing to still pick up the pieces, the relics of whatever has spilled. And it's not just what spills there, it is how what happens at that juncture of your life causes the spillage in all of your other roles, as much as you're trying to keep it together.
And also the victimization. I mean, the question that I have is that women should support each other more than men should support women in a way, because they would feel some kind of allyship and some kind of kindred spirit. But oftentimes you find that women tend to not believe. In your case, it was very easy to believe that you could see the wounds
and yet, Roscoe, and yet one of my greatest memories that still makes me frown 41 years later is also the memory of coming out of sedation and having two pretty significant older females, not my mom, but having two people who are able to witness this horror mask that you're wearing ask you what the sex was like. And those were two females. So, again, I say the demystification of what rape is. The fact that post that rape, I was never seen as a virgin, which speaks volumes as well in terms of perception of what a virgin is. Mm-hmm. And if it is boiled, if it comes down to the fact that you are no longer a virgin because your hymen was torn and obliterated and sliced away by a rapist, someone who violated you in the deepest of ways, and because of that, you're not a virgin. So you're looking at it only from a biological aspect. You're reducing my sense of purity to a membrane that defines virginity. And that was the other hectic persecution that I endured as well.
And what do you think drives that persecution?
self-righteousness, self-righteousness, and just an absolute, just toxic behavior. A sense, an inflated sense of self, where because of who I am and because of what I do or because of the surname I carry, I can now look down on you. You are not my equal, or you are not worthy of being someone's partner because he was a virgin and you weren't. Hectic.
Yeah.
Hectic.
So how long did it take for you to come to terms with this particular incident?
With this particular
incident, with this rape, with this violation?
I would say the full term would have been 23 years. And obviously the healing happened incrementally, but in the 23rd year, I was called to be part of the prison project, and I said yes, and I was going to meet the heads of the 28s and the 26s.
Most people would say no to the offer immediately, particularly,
I think,
given your background. So what motivated you?
I needed to convince myself.
Of what?
That I was healed, that I was strong. I always knew I wanted to make a difference in the lives of prisoners being rehabilitated in progress, prisoners in progress being rehabilitated, or rapists, rehabilitated rapists. And I think I used that opportunity to prove to myself that I could. And I was crap scared. I realized, what have I just done? I couldn't tell a soul because everyone would want to talk me out of it. And then I was divinely guided to write the poem, The Rape. And when I wrote the poem, I wrote it with a sensory acuity, as if I'd just woken up out of sedation. I remembered every single detail. I remembered every single sound. I remembered every single word. It was a lot of remembering. That was actually the excavation of the grave. That was the digging up. It was a lot in there. And then I read the poem, not knowing that when I would do that, that would be the key to unlocking my release. Because when I read the poem and reread the poem, I became an observer in my own story. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, and I read repeatedly, and I came across the line, while you were raping and bashing and brutalizing me, you called them whore, bitch, and motherfucker. Excuse, that's a quote unquote. Okay. And this was what he was calling his mother and his sister while he was bashing my head for 45 minutes against toilet towels. And by that time I had studied psychology. I was a qualified counselor, and I realized, my glory, this was actually displaced anger. It was never about me. It was about the fact that I was a vulnerable object for your anger issues that you had never, ever processed. And when I objectified that moment was my moment of, you have then faltered hopelessly as a human being, but you are a human being. You're not a beast. You must have gone through some stuff, not justifiable, not excusable. No violation is, no intentional violation is. But when I saw him no longer as a beast, and when I saw him as a human being that had hopelessly faltered, I no longer saw myself as his victim. And that in itself didn't just eradicate the victimhood from it for me. I didn't also then just become a survivor beyond that. I redefined Lynn as an absolutely enlightened human being.
Let's go from the grave to the garden. And then we're going to go to the grave again, but I promise you're going to end in the garden at the end of all of this. Just to comment on that last story, I feel like the therapy of writing is something that many people can connect with, and you don't need to be a professional writer like you are to write in that way. But I'm struck by something that once you eliminated, you rationalized him, almost took away an element of him being a force of nature, like a hurricane that will carve its own path through you, then sort of almost rationalizing his defects and faults and the things that are wrong with him. You could then see him, his frailty, and then that would take away the power from the hurricane that he was, and almost reclaim that into your own rationalization of what happened and how it happened?
I think in terms of reclamation, that would have been my ultimate. But the reclamation was also very incremental. And it also started very, very shortly after the rape. My first step to reclamation was forcing my eyes open, because they were still beaten shut 72 hours later. So I still could not see, but I could feel, and my head and my face and everything was 10 times the usual size. And I remember finding my way to the mirror, and I forced my eyes open. And what stared back at me was, well, I couldn't force it open completely. But what stared back at me was a horror mask. And my organic response to the horror mask was, this is not you. The very, very first step. The second one, and obviously I didn't realize it then, it's years of reflection and many, many interviews later. The second one was weeks after, about 3 weeks, my body was still numb. I still had bruises. I still had scars. School had just started, new academic year. And sitting there with myself was, I am feeling demolished. Heart, body, soul. I'm numb. I couldn't partake in athletics. I was just too numb, because that's what trauma does. And in that moment, I said to myself, you have demolished and could have demolished my heart, my body, my soul, but you are not going to demolish my dreams. You will not take that away from me. And I think in saying that, and I remember saying it out loud as well. When I said that, I was basically reclaiming back my power, because what I was implying was, you would not get in the way of the destiny that still needs to come alive inside of me. And you could do everything else, but I could control my destiny. And one of my mantras is, dreaming was my healing. And it still is today. It still is today.
So how has your story helped others, that in telling your story, in counseling, and how do you rely on the tools that you forge from the trauma to help others through their darkness?
I think that's the fulfilling part, Roscoe. That's the part where I know I would not have become who I am today had this not happened. And knowing that pain crafted my consciousness and my character has me judge the negative events in my life. In fact, not even far less. I just no longer judge it because it has led to this moment. And I think by now I've helped quite a few thousands through the medium of radio, through podcasts, through my book, through my talks, and the full utilization of just using every single opportunity to show up and to make a difference one life at a time. I've given many women and men the courage to tell their own stories, and that was the entire agenda, that as I share, others are inspired to share too. That I always knew others had to draw strength from my strength. That even as that 16-year-old in that courtroom, when I woke up out of sedation, I also found out that I was allegedly victim number 4 in the church.
Oh, wow.
And that was also my moment, again, not realizing that it was a moment of reclamation, but it was a moment of I will be the last. And I was only 15, and no one forced this upon me. And realizing that I could be their voice. And that drove me to be courageous throughout that level of torture in that courtroom, because it was torture. It was emotional torture to be told that you made the story up and, you are a dramatist, and so what if you were slapped a few times in your face and apparently you were wearing a jeans and today you're looking very different in your school uniform.
These were things that were actually said in
Yes.
the court. Wow.
Yes, it was a wow. And I took it to a point, and when I reached my threshold, I asked that very individual who was being as violating as the violator.
This would be a public defender.
Yes. I asked him if he had a mother and a sister, and a granny, and a niece, and if he had witnessed what I had gone through in a mirror sense of them having gone through what I did, would he still be asking me this?
Do you feel that the justice system is still at its core insensitive in this way, or have you seen things change over the years?
I have not seen things change because I've not experienced it. I've not been in the courtrooms. I am, however, told that very little has changed. One of the latest of 3 amendment bills is the fact that the victim no longer needs to be physically present, that there can be an intermediary that speaks on her behalf, etc., etc. But it's not just about the intermediary speaking on your behalf. It is, we need specialists. We need GBV specialists within the SAP system, within the legal system, where people are trained in a specific way to have the truth come out in a specific way that does not make the victim feel like he or her is being victimized again and violated again.
Or at least have the process of seeking justice not be petrol on the fire of trauma, in a way.
Absolutely. Back to patriarchy, back to SAPS. I said earlier, if SAPS does not know the latest acts and what the latest acts are saying, the amendments, and someone comes and says, I've been spiritually abused, what are they going to do? The night I was drugged in Johannesburg 5 years ago while on a business trip, and I was found by a group of women who took me to Morningside police station. And this group of women, they smelt my breath when they found me. They could see that I was coming to, and all I could say was Google me, and I gave them my name. And they then said, to heck, justice has to be served here. And to have, at that point, only 5 years ago, a police officer say that this woman is too intoxicated, we won't be seeing to her. And we were then and we are still now the rape capital of the world. And we ask ourselves why. So within each of these agencies, there's not only patriarchy, but the perpetuation of patriarchy has taken form, and we fed the beast because of a culture of non-accountability, where we have normalized social dysfunction on so many different levels, and that the very agencies who should be the groundbreakers and the trailblazers in reducing the statistics. It's not just about the statistics.
Exactly.
It's about having more lives lived to fulfill their dreams.
So online, gender-based violations, GBV, the nature of them and the manifestation of them has changed over the years. There's online GBV now. Of late, there's been a rise in this phrase called toxic femininity, almost as a response to women calling out toxic masculinity. There's a lot to navigate. I would say a lot more to navigate these days in terms of the language, all of which comes through a patriarchal lens, or at least a response through things being through a patriarchal lens. So I want to ask you a few things. What is online GBV? To your understanding, what is female or toxic femininity?
So, toxic masculinity, I'll get to the toxic femininity now. The toxic masculinity is where, by virtue of his gender, he draws on dominance, control, aggression, and all other forms of violation. Okay? Toxic femininity is how, through patriarchy, her identity comes to be reduced to only that of a role stereotype, an over-attachment to a stereotypical role, and where she's groomed and socialized through culture, through religion, through social systems and norms to take care of others at the expense of herself. And I thought long and hard about this as I was prepping today, and it was like, wow. So if a mother and a wife draws 100% of her identity of self from those two particular roles, and those two particular roles are destroyed through patriarchy, through GBV, then obviously this woman is going to feel that she is nothing, worth nothing, deserving of nothing, and has nothing. So toxic femininity is really internalized misogyny, and it's an outflow of patriarchy. I think what we're getting to, Roscoe, is the toxic behaviors that exist, which constitute violation, whether it is female to female, male to male, or male to female, whether it is human being to human being violation. Toxic behaviors, Covey calls them his 5 toxic C's: comparison, competition, criticism, contention, and what's the fifth C? But those are the C's that females often get very embroiled with. And while we can say that patriarchy has influenced the solidity of our identity in terms of who we are as socioeconomic, political contributors in this world, it has influenced it. But I certainly don't believe that blaming patriarchy for our toxic behaviors and for the dilution of an authentic sisterhood is going to move us any steps forward in developing a collective voice to assist in obliterating the scourge. It's one thing to be influenced by something, it's another thing to be determined by it. The moment we say patriarchy has caused us to be the females we are today, we are blaming. And when one puts a sense of blame on something, and I'm not saying that patriarchy has been blameless, I'm just saying that we still need to, as females, enlightened females, start taking the necessary accountability to become the women and the sisters that we are expecting others to be for us.
And again, if you blame patriarchy, it again gives patriarchy this agency, this power, or rather that creates a permission structure where women empowerment has to run through a patriarchal.
Absolutely. Right.
But in terms of how do you get rid of that? People say that feminists, not people, some misinformed men say that feminism actually just wants to make take away the testosterone out of men and make us drink like soy and things like that. How do you counter the stereotypes of what a man is, who I think a loose term, which I don't like, an ally in a way. I don't like the term ally to women, because of course, like, you should be, as a human being, you should be an ally.
I think it's time for us to also get over our polarized thinking, where we are, the time for male versus female, those times are over. It's about collaborative partnerships. It's about how we use our inherent differences to complement each other, rather than to use those very differences to draw a sense and a notion of supposed superiority or inferiority based on inherent differences, such as gender and such as race. That the very thing we are fighting now, because remember, it's a power principle. Any form of violation is a power principle playing out, where one agency or one party assumes that they have more power than the other based on a particular difference, whether it is socioeconomic status. In apartheid, it was race. Mm-hmm. In colonialism, it was the colonial and the more civilized versus the less civilized and the indigenous people. We have the same principle playing out in GBV. The notion that difference implies a superior component and an inferior component. Parallel empowerment for women and men is what we are needing. Parallel social rescripting for boys and girls is what we are needing. Less competition is what we are needing. More collaboration. At the end of the day, every transaction is a human-to-human transaction. And I'm very passionate about the concept of borrowed power versus authentic power. And the moment we start borrowing our power from our job titles, from our genders, from whatever we consider sets us superiorly apart, we are being inauthentic. Because real power is authentic power, and that comes from core. And core is essence. And essence and core are the parts within yourself that just make you you, without the scripting, without the role expectation.
Yeah. I think, Nandel, you've got a question. And I'm sure, can I get you some more water? Go.
So so my it's not really a question. It's just when you mentioned now we need more males and females to be equal. I'm reminded of a Yamal Beersum video that he shared a couple of weeks ago. Just mind me that. So he said the term breadwinner, for him it doesn't make sense, because he was talking to the males really, and he said if it shouldn't be a breadwinner because it should be collaborative.
Yes.
And I think you were alluding to the very same thing, where we definitely have two different roles, and a role doesn't necessarily have to be because you're male, you automatically have to sit in this
Yes.
role, and it depends on the couple itself or the individual itself, and that's just I just wanted to add that we have been, I think we've been marginalized and coded in a sense.
Absolutely.
When
through the social scripting, to a point that as much as the female is sometimes afraid to step out of the role, the male is afraid to step out of the role. And when both are afraid to step out of the role, you have more of role behavior than authentic behavior. So who are you when you are not the husband and the dad? Who were you before you became my partner? And what makes you happy? Not as a male or as a female, but as a human being. So I'm very much on this humanity thing.
Social re-scripting, in a way, there's some forces that force us for social re-scripting. For example, like COVID, I imagine was one of the external factors that forced people to re-script in some households where COVID caused many people to lose their jobs. Oftentimes, they had to be the woman had to be the breadwinner, so to speak.
Yeah.
But besides acts of God like that, how there would be resistance to social re-scripting among particularly conservative people. We are a conservative society here in South Africa. So how we see it in terms of gender roles and those scripts that we follow. So how do we then socially re-script these roles so that we can have better outcomes, especially when it comes to GBV?
The only time anyone will change a behavior, Roscoe, is when they will ascertain the value of that changed behavior. We re-scripted in COVID, and it was forced. But we were also able to draw the value and the benefits of. We were forced to do things differently, and if you were not going to be open to doing things differently, you would just become insane. But there was also benefits in doing things differently, working from home as much of, I guess that was a little bit contentious, but It set a lot of companies up for doing things differently that people don't, and some companies are even post-COVID. Now, you don't have to have face-to-face time all of the time, that you can do virtual days. I know City of Cape Town is still engaging in some of that. So social re-scripting, when a parent living within this GBV context, and hopefully the home is fairly functional, when that parent buys into the value of, I need to send a different message to my boy child and my girl child about, one, her worth, and two, about his mental health. If every single parent of a little boy could just commit to them rewiring their own script to tell that boy it's okay to cry and it's okay to not be okay all of the time, and it's okay to speak about feelings. If we can commit to doing the little things because of the eventual value that we will see in it, and we do it as a collective, we can play a huge role. That's just family. Then there's school. Then there is the potential of including spiritual and emotional intelligence as part of a school curriculum, not only for early childhood development, primary school, high school, universities, within the corporate sector, that EQ and SQ needs to become an integral part of the profiling, the recruitment and selection process, the support structures within these structures.
Now we're getting into psychometry. You said we wouldn't talk about psychometry, but you made the link to that.
But it's just there's so much. There's so much that I think we can still do as individuals. There's so much accountability that we can take to be that difference that we're seeking. And it starts with our children. It starts with expecting even different things from ourselves within our own context. Because remember, I've also grown up within a stereotypical context. So as part of my re-scripting, I still have a mother who defines her sense of being by her doing rather than her being.
Yes.
And I have come to copy that. It's in my DNA. And on some days now I'm re-scripting to say it's not about the doing, it is about the being that you take into the quality of that doing. So even in our 50s, we are products of severe stereotypical social scripting when it came to gender. And then I had to change that with my two kids as a single mom. And proud to say I got it more right than wrong on days, especially with my son.
Well, that's good. And you would know, as a mother and as a counselor, that a lot of what we do takes place more and more in the online realm. So along with our lives being almost transplanted online, almost piecemeal, not piecemeal, but almost entirely, that things like online GBV is becoming more and more prevalent. And yet it's harder to define, because it sometimes lacks context or tone, or somebody can, if somebody says something to you, it's easier to define tone and whatever the case may be. Whereas if somebody posts that, it's easy for them to say, oh, but that was a joke, I was being sarcastic, for example, as a mask. Right? So how do you define online GBV, and do you think that people, like authorities, like the police, the cops, take that seriously?
If they were, then the online bullying would not be escalating at the rate that it is.
what's the indication for an increasing curve of escalation of this kind of behavior?
Roscoe, all I'm going to go on now, because I've not looked at the stats, but all I'm going to go on is how many more people are seeking assistance from me as a counselor as a result of being bullied, cyberbullied. And there's an increase. And I think two things about the cyberbullying. The one is that the insecure individual, who is in the individual who does the bullying, because all bullies are essentially insecure.
And they're also narcissists.
Narcissists have their own agenda, will push for their own agenda at all costs. Anyone who does that is insecure, has an agenda, and is utilizing the audience that comes with the onlineness. So very little bullying is done without public presence.
They need that validation.
It's the validation that's required. And then again, we fall into the trap of not seeing the comment for what it is, and then it's either response or non-response, and you have that person then developing a support structure for what that person is doing, and the other person being totally deflated. I've had some influencers who withdraw completely, and these are people of impact, people of wisdom, who then withdraw from the social media context because, you know what, I don't need this in my life. But you're actually robbing so many other people of just the richness of what you can bring. So how do we deal with it? Start calling those people out, man. And again, hurt people hurt people. And for anyone out there who is currently being cyberbullied, know that you're important enough for this to be happening. Because if you were not important, there would be no reason to bully you.
It's almost like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because if you ignore them, you kind of give a permission structure to them. You kind of almost give what they would interpret as tacit consent.
Yes.
And if you call them out, it almost validates, especially narcissists who would say, look at this person, they blah, blah, blah,
Yes.
blah, 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 blah. So how do you sort of almost cut the troll's legs off without feeding them in a way?
Block them.
Block them?
Block them. I mean, there's sometimes when I have trolls I would put out a post, an inspirational post. Oh my gosh. And then this post will be taken to a point of, who are you to say this? Or do you realize the other context of it? And I'm thinking, sure.
You're just trying to put something nice on the feed.
If you can just take all of that in energy and channel it into your PhD in philosophy, on a subject of your choice, please do. There are times when I respond, and there are times when I will not respond. And again, no violator or perpetrator is worthy of your attention. In my case, at the age of 15, it was, I will hold on to my dreams, I will own my dreams, because if I don't, I'm basically giving you permission to have my lifelong attention. And so when it comes to the cyber stuff, I guess we need to use discernment. Is it worth it? For me, is how does what is happening around me, how does it speak to my divine mandate? And if it doesn't speak to my divine mandate, my highest values, and who I know I am, then it's actually none of my business.
Absolutely.
And that's how I disrupt them.
Oh, good. No, that's good, because I mean, you see more and more these days this sort of affliction of trauma takes place online. And the phones have become such a ubiquitous part of any individual, even a teenager's life, that to have a bully like on their side desk, like to have that there, it's something that's so invasive. It's something that's so damaging to an individual psyche.
Totally.
People need their phones. I mean, these days teenagers, they don't know what life is without the phone. I mean, we can still, like, think back to the days when there was like landlines and you had to look somebody up. There was a
Yes.
phone book, but for a bully or for a narcissist to have access to this person, it almost in a way have invade their prospects, their future prospects in a way, to damage them, to cut them off at the knees if they're a teenager, and to almost to dry up their will to go out and live their professional life. It's particularly damaging.
And I think, again, for some profiling to be done around narcissists, or an information sheet to actually be accessible to teenagers, to say, these are the attributes of the narcissists, these are the attributes of the bullies. If this is happening to you, please know that it's got nothing to do with you, it's got everything to do with them. So the scripting that we speak of, the social re-scripting when it comes to GBV, that is an integral part of that social re-scripting.
And not just teenagers. There's a lot of 40-odd-year-old narcissists in the world.
Totally.
Yeah. Lynn, I want to talk about now, as we try to land this plane, trauma and reclamation of power, because you have lived through quite things that would have just sunk any other person. Is it something about you that's special that you can I would say effectively reclaim your power, reclaim your I would say purpose, or find your purpose? Or were there steps that you had to work through? What does the process look like for mere mortals? And
I am a mere mortal. I am definitely no more special than anyone else in the world. In the last chapter of my book, I look at Viktor Frankl and I look at Nelson Mandela. And where Frankl was tortured in the Nazi concentration camp, Mandela on the island. And the parallel between the two of them was that both of them had made a decision about their condition. And it was pretty much that when they could have been buried, they chose to be planted. And they realized that never mind what was happening around them, what was happening around them was nothing compared to what could be happening inside of them. And we are the instigators of our internal world. Never mind how brutalized, never mind how bruised, never mind how wounded the outside world and what the outside world's agenda is. Reclamation is really self-definition. Reclamation is really, I will not be defined by a label such as colored. I will not be defined by a label such as rape victim or divorcee or whatever other label. I am a self-defined individual. And both these two men as well, the parallels in terms of what made my grave become my garden, was that both of these two men found purpose in their pain. They knew that there was a fulfillment of something that would be present beyond the pain. In Mandela's case, it was a democratic country and a free nation. And in Viktor Frankl's case, it was how the very Holocaust that he had needed to endure would also become a path of enlightenment, not only for himself, but for others. And he found meaning in his pain. So the first thing, reclamation, find the purpose in your pain. Never mind what that pain is. It's either trying to teach you something, or it's revealing something, or it's shaking you to do something about something. The second is that we don't always get to choose what happens to us. We don't get to choose which communities we're born into or what our color is at birth. But we do get to choose how we will spend the rest of our lives. I didn't get to choose to be raped. I did not choose rape, but I did choose destiny over it. And when we choose, we're basically choosing where our focus lies. Why choose to focus on the past when the past is never ever going to propel you anywhere? And so choosing, when you choose your focus, you're translating choice and focus into perspective. What is the lens that you want to wear? And again, that lens becomes a choice. The other thing about consciousness is that you can't be in any one conscious, you can't be in a conscious, more than one conscious state. In other words, you cannot be a victim and a visionary at the same time. If you can't be a victim and a visionary at the same time, it implies that you have a choice to make. You can be one or the other, but not both. And when it comes to being conscious about consciousness, we realize that conscious choice is integral to that. The other is gratitude. People ask me, how possibly could you be grateful for the fact that you weren't raped once, but you were raped twice? My answer is, I was raped the first time, yes, and I nearly died, but I didn't. So I became grateful for the gift of my life and the purpose that gift, that went with that gift. The second, I was drugged, and I could have been human trafficked, but I wasn't. I was spared to be in studio tonight with you. And the last is, I guess, for both Frankel, Mandela, and Lynn Hill, it is forgiveness and release. If you do not forgive and you do not release, you will never create the space inside of you to articulate and grow and feed self-definition, because you'll forever belong to something or someone else.
Forgiveness is probably the hardest part of that.
Yes, it is.
How do you even begin to fathom forgiving someone? Or
I think forgiveness also requires demystification. That a lot of what we sit with around our understanding of forgiveness is decontextualized from certain biblical verses of, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, give them the left, or vice versa, whatever. I think forgiveness as a concept needs to be demystified, that when you forgive someone, it does not mean that you condone their behavior.
And nor does it erase the act.
Nor does it erase the fact that something has happened. In my case, and I can only speak for my case, and the level of release that it brought about, is I understood the behavior. I didn't excuse it.
Mm. Well, Lynn, look, how do you're a writer, you're a counselor. How do we get hold of your work and your books and your talks?
So Butterfly, My Soul Got Wings, What Life Has Taught Me. Book 1 is available on Take-A-Lot. It's available on Amazon, and it is available at selected P&A stores in the southern suburbs. As a speaker going forward, I'm told that my name will appear on your website, I think, so people could be doing some bookings through you.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and Facebook.
Yeah, so anybody that would like to hire Lynn as a speaker can just inbox us, and we will make contact.
We will, and we'll put the links in the description of this on YouTube and the podcast, and the YouTube and the Facebook.
Yeah, 100%.
You had a poem that we wanted to hear.
Oh.
Yes.
So what? Thanks for the reminder, Roscoe. You spoke about trauma, and trauma certainly silences. Trauma devoices. Trauma diminishes. And reclamation very often is about needing to find the voice that you didn't even necessarily silence, that someone else could have silenced for you. In my case, I didn't just find the voice, I transmuted that voice into a roar. And I bless you with one of my poems called Hear Her Roar, in honor of not only 16 days of activism, but of all those who did not live to tell their stories, and of all those who died on the inside while living as a result of gender-based violation. Hear her roar. She may have silently screamed when pain became her second name. She may have swallowed rivers of tears pretending not to drown. She may even have contemplated death when she felt there was no reason to keep on keeping on. But now hear her roar as she shouts this to the world. While pain became my second name, it was my gateway to victory all the same. And the rivers of tears in which I thought I'd one day drown, well, that's now become my riverbed on which my mermaid treasures can now be found. And as for death, death died its bloody death when my divine purpose became my only breath. And now my roar is the tender, compassionate, inspiring whispers I feed my brothers and sisters so that their own suffering will not starve them. And now my roar is my voice through which I channel those who have been devoiced by systems and perplexities beyond their own control. And now my roar is the half moon that shines across my face as I smile at the beauty of living a purposeful, triumphant life. And now my roar is the license I choose to give myself to unconditionally love myself, because self-love now amplifies my presence in this world. And now my roar is my laughter that tumbles from deep within my soul, bouncing between light and love and the realization that I was never broken but always whole. And now my roar is my fulfilled dreams, a self-made oasis birthed in a desert in which I did not ask to be birthed in, get lost in, or get raped in twice. And now my roar is my uncompromised, unapologetic authenticity. And now my roar is the true celebration of my precious soul's sacredity. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your time, your power, your story with us. It's been an enlightening, difficult, but ultimately a privilege conversation with you today, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nantel. Thank you so much for tonight. And we are on again on Thursday. And until then, thanks for joining. See you.